Marcus Thompson had served as a senior royal protection officer for 12 years, but he had never seen Prince William move with such quiet determination as he did that Tuesday morning in October 2022. The autumn mist clung to the palace gardens like secrets waiting to be unveiled, and Marcus could sense that something fundamental was about to shift in the centuries-old machinery of the British monarchy. Standing at his usual post near the private entrance to the Queen's former study, Marcus watched as William strode through the corridor with a manila folder tucked under his arm. His footsteps echoed differently that day, more purposeful, more final. The Prince of Wales had requested that all routine meetings be cleared from his schedule, a unusual directive that had sent ripples of curiosity through the palace staff. The first sign that this day would be unlike any other came when William personally dismissed Sir Reginald Hartwell, the palace's long-serving private secretary, who had managed royal correspondence for nearly 3 decades. Marcus had positioned himself discreetly near the oak-paneled office door when he heard William's voice, calm but unmistakably firm. "Reginald, your service has been exemplary, but we're moving in a different direction. Your final day will be Friday." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the slightly ajar door, Marcus could see Sir Reginald's face drain of color, his fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. This was a man who had navigated royal protocol through scandals, celebrations, and constitutional crises. His dismissal sent a clear message that no one was untouchable in William's new vision for the monarchy. "Your Highness, might I ask what has prompted this decision?" Sir Reginald's voice carried the weight of shock and wounded pride. William's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. "The institution requires fresh perspectives and modernized approaches. We need people who understand that tradition must evolve to survive." As Sir Reginald gathered his belongings, Marcus noticed other subtle changes beginning to unfold throughout the palace. The morning briefings that had traditionally taken place in the Queen's former sitting room were moved to William's private office. The guest lists for upcoming events were being personally reviewed by William rather than delegated to the usual committee of advisors. Even the flower arrangements were changed. Gone were the formal, symmetrical displays favored by the old guard, replaced by more natural, organic arrangements that reflected a younger sensibility. Lady Margaret Pemberton, the deputy private secretary and Sir Reginald's obvious successor, found herself summoned to William's office within hours of Sir Reginald's departure. Marcus had served long enough to read the subtle signs of palace politics, and he could see that Lady Margaret was nervous. Her usually perfect composure showed small cracks, a slight tremor in her hands, the way she smoothed her skirt repeatedly before knocking on the door. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than the typical 15-minute briefings that had characterized previous administrations. When Lady Margaret emerged, her expression was unreadable, but Marcus noticed she carried herself differently. There was a new energy about her, as if she had been entrusted with something significant and transformative. That afternoon, Marcus observed William conducting a series of one-on-one meetings with department heads throughout the palace. Each conversation lasted exactly 30 minutes, and each person who entered William's office emerged with what appeared to be a specific set of new directives. The head of communications, the chief financial officer, the master of the household, all received their individual briefings in this methodical procession. The most telling moment came when Sir Charles Whitmore, the Lord Chamberlain, and one of the most powerful figures in the royal household, arrived for his appointment. Sir Charles had served under 3 monarchs and commanded enormous respect within palace walls. His influence extended far beyond his official duties, and many considered him the unofficial guardian of royal tradition. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the meeting without appearing intrusive. Sir Charles entered William's office with his usual confident bearing, but when he emerged 45 minutes later, something had fundamentally changed. The older man's face was ashen, and he moved with the careful steps of someone who had just received devastating news. Later that evening, as Marcus completed his security rounds, he learned from whispered conversations among the staff that Sir Charles had been informed his role was being restructured. While he would retain his title, his actual authority was being significantly reduced. Decisions that had once flowed through his office would now be made directly by William and his hand-picked team. The ripple effects of these changes became apparent over the following days. Staff members who had operated with relative autonomy for years suddenly found themselves reporting directly to William's office. The elaborate hierarchy that had governed palace operations for generations was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to William's vision. Marcus began to understand that he was witnessing something historically significant. This wasn't merely a change in personnel or a shift in protocol. William was fundamentally restructuring how the monarchy operated, moving away from the collective decision-making process that had characterized his grandmother's reign toward a more centralized, hands-on approach to royal leadership. The changes weren't limited to administrative matters. Marcus noticed that the physical spaces within the palace were being subtly altered as well. Portraits of distant relatives were replaced with more recent family photos. The formal receiving rooms that had intimidated visitors for centuries were made more welcoming with softer lighting and comfortable seating arrangements. Even the daily routines that had governed palace life were evolving. The rigid schedule of meals, meetings, and ceremonies was being relaxed to accommodate a more flexible approach to royal duties. William was clearly interested in making the monarchy more accessible and relatable to modern British society. As the first week of changes concluded, Marcus found himself reflecting on what he had witnessed. The efficiency with which William had implemented these reforms suggested months, perhaps years, of careful planning. This wasn't an impulsive reaction to recent events, but rather the execution of a comprehensive strategy to modernize the monarchy for the 21st century. The old guard's resistance was palpable but subdued. Years of training in discretion and loyalty meant that dissatisfaction was expressed through subtle glances and carefully worded conversations rather than open rebellion. However, Marcus could sense the underlying tension, as traditional power structures were dismantled and rebuilt. By Friday afternoon, when Sir Reginald cleared out his office for the final time, the transformation was already taking visible shape. The palace operated with a new rhythm, faster-paced and more responsive to contemporary expectations. Decisions that had once taken weeks of consultation and committee review were being made in days. Marcus realized that his role as a protection officer provided him with a unique vantage point to observe this historic transition. While the public would eventually see the results of William's reforms, Marcus was witnessing the actual machinery of change as it unfolded. He was seeing how power truly operated within the monarchy and how quickly established systems could be transformed when someone with sufficient authority decided to act. The week concluded with a brief staff meeting where William addressed the entire household. His message was clear and diplomatic, but carried an unmistakable undertone of authority. The monarchy was evolving, he explained, and everyone would need to adapt to new ways of working. Those who embraced the changes would find opportunities for growth and advancement. Those who resisted would likely find themselves looking for new positions. As Marcus returned home that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed the beginning of a new era in British royal history. The locks hadn't literally changed at Buckingham Palace, but the metaphorical doors of power had been completely restructured. William had quietly but decisively reshaped the monarchy's power structure, and there would be no going back to the old ways of doing things. 3 weeks after the initial restructuring, Marcus Thompson began to see the deeper implications of William's reforms as resistance from the old guard crystallized into something more organized and potentially dangerous. The Prince of Wales had anticipated pushback, but even Marcus, with his years of experience reading palace dynamics, was surprised by the sophistication of the opposition that emerged. The first clear sign of organized resistance came during what should have been a routine security briefing. Marcus was reviewing the week's protection schedules when he noticed an unusual pattern of meetings taking place in locations that weren't typically monitored by the main security apparatus. Senior staff members were gathering in the palace's historical archives, the flower-arranging rooms, and even the kitchens, spaces that provided privacy from the electronic surveillance systems that covered the main offices. Sir Charles Whitmore, despite his diminished official role, had become the unofficial leader of this shadow organization. Marcus observed him moving through the palace with renewed purpose, engaging in brief, seemingly casual conversations with other displaced officials. These weren't social chats. Marcus could recognize the body language of conspiracy when he saw it. Heads bent close together, quick glances to ensure privacy, and conversations that stopped abruptly when others approached. The stakes became clear when Marcus discovered that sensitive information about William's planned reforms was being leaked to certain members of Parliament and influential media contacts. The leaks weren't random gossip. They were strategic revelations designed to portray William as an inexperienced usurper who was dismantling cherished traditions without proper consultation or consideration for constitutional precedent. Lady Margaret Pemberton, now serving as William's chief advisor, confided in Marcus during one of their routine security consultations that external pressure was mounting. Conservative members of Parliament were asking pointed questions about the pace and scope of changes within the royal household. Newspaper columnists, clearly receiving information from palace insiders, were writing increasingly critical pieces about William's leadership style. "They're trying to make him look like he's acting beyond his authority," Lady Margaret explained, her voice tight with frustration. "Every change is being characterized as reckless modernization that threatens the very foundation of the monarchy." Marcus began conducting more thorough surveillance of the palace's communication systems, operating under special authorization from William himself. What he discovered was a sophisticated network of former officials and current staff members who were coordinating their efforts to undermine the new administration. They used personal mobile phones, encrypted messaging apps, and even handwritten notes to avoid detection by standard monitoring protocols. The most damaging leak came when details of William's plan to significantly reduce the number of working royals became public before the official announcement. The story appeared simultaneously in 3 major newspapers, complete with quotes from senior palace sources expressing concern about the impact on royal duties and public appearances. The coordinated nature of the coverage made it clear that this wasn't accidental. Someone was orchestrating a media campaign against William's reforms. Marcus watched William's reaction to these leaks with professional interest. Rather than becoming defensive or slowing the pace of change, the Prince of Wales accelerated his timeline. Within days, he had implemented new security protocols for sensitive meetings and restricted access to confidential documents. More importantly, he began meeting individually with staff members he suspected of being part of the resistance network. These weren't confrontational encounters. William was far too sophisticated for direct accusations without concrete proof. Instead, he used these meetings to test loyalty and gather intelligence about the opposition's plans. Marcus was present for several of these conversations, ostensibly as a security precaution, but actually serving as a witness to William's strategic maneuvering. During one particularly tense meeting with the deputy master of the household, Marcus observed William employing what could only be described as psychological warfare. He shared false information about future plans, carefully crafted to see if it would appear in subsequent leaks. When it did, William knew exactly who was feeding information to his opponents. The confrontation with Sir Charles Whitmore was inevitable, and when it came, Marcus was strategically positioned to observe every detail. William had scheduled what appeared to be a routine courtesy meeting, but Marcus could sense the underlying tension as both men prepared for what amounted to a diplomatic battle for control of the monarchy's future direction. Sir Charles arrived with the bearing of a man who believed he held significant leverage. He had spent weeks building his coalition of resistance and gathering external support for his position. His confidence was evident in his posture and the way he spoke. This wasn't a subordinate meeting with his superior, but rather a power broker negotiating from a position of perceived strength. William's approach was masterful in its subtlety. He allowed Sir Charles to present his concerns about the pace of change and the importance of maintaining constitutional traditions. He listened patiently to suggestions that a more collaborative approach might better serve the monarchy's long-term interests. Throughout this presentation, William remained calm and thoughtful, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his respect for Sir Charles's experience and perspective. Then, with devastating precision, William revealed that he knew about the organized opposition, the strategic leaks, and the external pressure campaign. He didn't make accusations or threats. He simply shared information that made it clear he was fully aware of what was happening. The color drained from Sir Charles's face as he realized his carefully constructed resistance network had been compromised. "Charles," William said, his voice carrying quiet authority, "I understand your concerns about preserving tradition, but what you've organized goes beyond loyal opposition. It's active sabotage of the monarchy's ability to adapt and survive." Sir Charles attempted to maintain his composure, but Marcus could see the older man's confidence crumbling. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his teacup, and his voice carried a tremor when he responded. "Your Highness, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of our discussions." "There's no misunderstanding. I have detailed records of communications, meeting schedules, and media contacts. I know about the coordinated leak strategy and the parliamentary pressure campaign." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus had witnessed many confrontations during his years of service, but few carried the weight of this moment. Sir Charles was being offered a choice: graceful retirement or public exposure of his actions. For a man who had devoted his life to protecting the monarchy's reputation, the decision was inevitable. Within the hour, Sir Charles had submitted his resignation, citing personal health reasons and a desire to spend more time with his family. The announcement was crafted to maintain his dignity while clearly signaling that his influence within the palace was permanently ended. The dismantling of the resistance network proceeded swiftly after Sir Charles's departure. Without their leader, the remaining conspirators found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Some chose to resign voluntarily, while others were quietly transferred to positions with significantly reduced access to sensitive information. Marcus was impressed by the surgical precision with which William handled the situation. There were no public scandals, no embarrassing revelations, and no damage to the monarchy's public image. The old guard simply faded away, replaced by a new generation of officials who understood and supported William's vision for modernization. The speed and efficiency of these changes sent a clear message throughout the palace. Resistance to the new order was not only futile, but potentially career-ending. Staff members who had been hesitant to embrace William's reforms suddenly became enthusiastic supporters. The atmosphere within the palace shifted from one of uncertainty and tension to one of focused energy and purpose. Lady Margaret's role became increasingly central to the new power structure. She served as William's primary liaison with both internal staff and external stakeholders, ensuring that the prince's vision was consistently communicated and implemented. Her transformation from nervous deputy to confident administrator exemplified the opportunities available to those who aligned themselves with the new direction. The external pressure campaign collapsed almost overnight once the internal leaks stopped. Without insider information to fuel their stories, journalists found themselves unable to maintain their critical coverage. Parliamentary questions became less pointed and more routine as members of Parliament realized they were no longer receiving strategic intelligence from palace sources. By the end of the month, William had successfully consolidated his control over the monarchy's administrative apparatus. The old system of collective decision-making and traditional hierarchy had been replaced by a more streamlined structure centered on William's personal authority. This wasn't merely a personnel change. It was a fundamental shift in how royal power was exercised and maintained. Marcus reflected on the sophistication of what he had witnessed. William had simultaneously outmaneuvered his internal opponents, neutralized external pressure, and restructured the monarchy's operations without creating any public scandals or constitutional crises. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering that demonstrated why William was uniquely qualified to lead the monarchy into the modern era. The palace settled into its new rhythm with remarkable speed. Staff members who had initially been uncertain about the changes began to appreciate the increased efficiency and clearer lines of authority. Decisions were made more quickly, communication was more direct, and there was a renewed sense of purpose in their daily work. As Marcus completed his evening rounds, he realized that William had achieved something historically significant. He had modernized one of the world's oldest institutions without destroying its essential character or undermining its constitutional role. The locks had indeed changed, and there was no doubt about who now held all the keys. 2 months after the initial restructuring, Marcus Thompson found himself witnessing the true test of William's reforms as the monarchy faced its first major crisis under the new power structure. The death of a prominent Commonwealth leader required immediate diplomatic responses, public statements, and ceremonial arrangements, exactly the type of complex situation that had traditionally taken weeks of committee consultation and bureaucratic coordination to resolve. Marcus was stationed outside William's office when the news broke at 4:30 on a Wednesday morning. Within minutes, the palace transformed into a hub of controlled urgency as staff members arrived to manage the crisis. Under the old system, this would have triggered a cascade of meetings, consultations, and incremental decisions that could have taken days to produce a comprehensive response. Instead, Marcus observed William take personal control of the situation with remarkable efficiency. By 6 a.m., he had already spoken directly with the Commonwealth leader's family, coordinated with the Prime Minister's office, and outlined a complete response strategy that addressed diplomatic, ceremonial, and media requirements. The streamlined decision-making process that had seemed theoretical during the earlier reorganization now demonstrated its practical value in real-world conditions. Lady Margaret Pemberton coordinated the implementation of William's directives with the precision of a military operation. Each department received specific instructions and timelines, eliminating the confusion and overlap that had characterized previous crisis responses. Marcus watched as decades of bureaucratic inefficiency were replaced by clear chains of command and direct accountability. The media response was particularly telling. Under the old system, official statements would have required approval from multiple committees and taken hours to craft and release. William's streamlined approach allowed the monarchy to respond to the crisis within 90 minutes of the initial news breaking, demonstrating both respect for the deceased leader and the institution's ability to act decisively in important moments. However, the real test came when Marcus discovered that certain members of the old guard were attempting to exploit the crisis to regain influence. Former officials who had been quietly marginalized during the earlier restructuring saw an opportunity to demonstrate their continued relevance by offering their services during this challenging period. Sir Reginald Hartwell, the dismissed private secretary, reached out to several current staff members with offers to provide guidance based on his experience managing similar situations during previous reigns. His approach was subtle and seemingly helpful, but Marcus recognized it as an attempt to insert himself back into the decision-making process and potentially undermine the new protocols. The situation became more complex when several members of Parliament, clearly influenced by communications from displaced palace officials, began questioning whether William's rapid response to the crisis had followed proper constitutional procedures. They suggested that important diplomatic decisions had been made without sufficient consultation with relevant government departments and traditional advisory bodies. Marcus observed William's response to this challenge with growing admiration. Rather than becoming defensive or reverting to older, more cumbersome procedures, the Prince of Wales used the criticism as an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of his reforms. He invited the most vocal parliamentary critics to witness the streamlined decision-making process firsthand during the planning of the memorial service. The parliamentary delegation arrived at the palace expecting to find chaos or constitutional irregularities. Instead, they discovered a highly organized operation where every decision was documented, every stakeholder was consulted through efficient direct communication, and every protocol was followed, just more quickly and effectively than had been possible under the previous system. Marcus was present when William personally briefed the delegation on how the new structure maintained all traditional safeguards while eliminating redundant bureaucratic layers. The prince demonstrated that faster decision-making didn't mean less careful consideration. It meant removing obstacles that had prevented the monarchy from responding appropriately to rapidly changing situations. The turning point came when the memorial service itself took place. The event was executed flawlessly, with every detail reflecting both proper diplomatic protocol and genuine emotional resonance. International dignitaries praised the British monarchy's handling of the situation, and media coverage highlighted the institution's ability to provide meaningful leadership during times of loss and transition. More importantly for William's long-term objectives, the success of the crisis response validated his reforms in the eyes of previously skeptical observers. Staff members who had harbored doubts about the new system saw tangible evidence of its effectiveness. External critics found themselves unable to maintain their opposition when confronted with clearly superior results. Marcus noticed that the attempted comeback by displaced officials collapsed entirely in the aftermath of this success. Sir Reginald's offers of assistance were politely declined and quietly discouraged. The parliamentary pressure subsided as members realized that William's approach was producing better outcomes than traditional methods. The crisis had become a demonstration of institutional strength rather than a source of vulnerability. The psychological impact of this validation extended throughout the palace organization. Staff members began to take pride in their ability to respond quickly and effectively to challenges. The energy and confidence that had been building during the earlier reorganization solidified into a genuine transformation of institutional culture. William used this momentum to implement the final phase of his reforms, changes that would have been impossible to introduce during the initial restructuring, but were now accepted as natural extensions of proven improvements. The most significant of these was the introduction of modern technology and data analysis into royal decision-making processes. Marcus observed teams of young analysts working alongside traditional palace staff to provide William with real-time information about public opinion, media coverage, and international reactions to royal activities. This wasn't replacing human judgment with automated systems. It was enhancing the quality of information available for important decisions. The integration of these new capabilities proceeded smoothly because the foundation had been properly established during the earlier reorganization. Staff members understood that innovation supported rather than threatened their roles, and they embraced tools that made their work more effective and impactful. The transformation extended beyond administrative efficiency to fundamental changes in how the monarchy engaged with British society. William's streamlined decision-making process enabled more responsive and relevant royal activities. The institution could react quickly to social issues, national celebrations, and international developments in ways that demonstrated genuine connection with contemporary life. Marcus was particularly impressed by how William managed to maintain the monarchy's traditional dignity and ceremony while making it more accessible and relatable to modern audiences. Royal events became more inclusive and diverse, reflecting the changing character of British society without abandoning the historic traditions that provided continuity and meaning. The financial implications of these reforms were equally significant. The streamlined administrative structure reduced operational costs while improving outcomes. Resources that had previously been consumed by bureaucratic processes were redirected toward more meaningful public service activities and charitable initiatives. Lady Margaret provided Marcus with regular updates on the quantitative measures of improvement. Response times to correspondence had decreased by 60%. Event planning efficiency had increased by 40%. Public approval ratings for the monarchy had reached their highest levels in over a decade. These weren't subjective assessments. They were measurable improvements that justified William's approach from multiple perspectives. The international dimension of the transformation was perhaps most revealing. Other constitutional monarchies began studying William's reforms as potential models for their own modernization efforts. The British monarchy, which had sometimes seemed antiquated compared to more streamlined European royal houses, was suddenly being viewed as a leader in institutional innovation. Marcus reflected on the remarkable completeness of William's achievement. In less than 6 months, he had fundamentally restructured one of the world's most tradition-bound institutions without creating constitutional crises, public scandals, or operational disruptions. The monarchy was more efficient, more responsive, and more relevant while maintaining all of its essential characteristics and constitutional functions. The personal cost of these changes was something Marcus was uniquely positioned to observe. William had shouldered enormous responsibility and pressure during the transformation process. The prince had made difficult decisions about loyal staff members, endured criticism from respected figures, and risked his reputation on unproven approaches to royal leadership. However, Marcus could see that these sacrifices had been worthwhile. William had positioned the monarchy to thrive in the 21st century while honoring its historical role and significance. The institution was stronger, more capable, and more purposeful than it had been in generations. As Marcus completed his final security rounds of the transformed palace, he realized he had witnessed something truly historic. The day the locks changed had marked the beginning of a new era in British royal history, one where ancient traditions and modern capabilities combined to create an institution uniquely equipped to serve contemporary society while maintaining its timeless significance. The monarchy had been reborn under William's leadership, and Marcus knew that future generations would benefit from the courage and vision demonstrated during these transformative months. The locks had indeed changed, and what they now protected was both thoroughly modern and authentically royal. 6 months after witnessing the initial transformation, Marcus Thompson found himself reflecting on the lasting implications of William's reforms as the monarchy faced its ultimate test, the first major constitutional challenge under the new power structure. The crisis emerged from an unexpected source: a serious disagreement between the royal household and the government over Britain's response to an international humanitarian disaster. The situation began when a devastating earthquake struck a former Commonwealth nation, creating an urgent need for coordinated international relief efforts. Under traditional protocols, the monarchy's response would have been largely ceremonial, expressing sympathy, hosting fundraising events, and providing moral support for government-led assistance programs. However, William's modernized approach to royal duties had created capabilities and expectations that went far beyond these conventional roles. Marcus was present when William received the initial briefing about the disaster from his newly streamlined intelligence network. Within hours, the prince had developed a comprehensive response plan that included direct royal involvement in relief coordination, personal diplomatic outreach to international partners, and the deployment of royal resources in ways that had never been attempted before. The tension arose when the government, led by a prime minister who had grown comfortable with the previous monarchy's more limited role, expressed concern about constitutional boundaries. The PM's office suggested that William's proposed response exceeded appropriate royal involvement in matters of international policy and disaster management. Marcus observed the delicate negotiations that followed as William navigated between his desire to maximize the monarchy's positive impact and the need to maintain proper constitutional relationships. The prince's streamlined decision-making structure, which had proven so effective in earlier challenges, now faced its most serious test, as external pressures threatened to force a return to more restrictive traditional boundaries. Lady Margaret Pemberton worked tirelessly to find solutions that would satisfy both royal ambitions and governmental concerns. Her role had evolved far beyond traditional private secretary duties. She had become a strategic advisor capable of managing complex constitutional negotiations while protecting William's reform agenda. The breakthrough came when William proposed an innovative partnership model that would allow the monarchy to contribute its unique capabilities while maintaining appropriate governmental oversight. Rather than simply deferring to traditional limitations, he suggested creating new protocols that could maximize the benefits of royal involvement while respecting constitutional principles. Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of William's approach. The prince had learned from his earlier experiences with the Old Guard's resistance to develop strategies that converted potential opponents into collaborative partners. Instead of fighting constitutional constraints, he worked within them to create expanded possibilities for meaningful royal service. The international response to this crisis management innovation was remarkable. Foreign governments and international organizations quickly recognized the value of having a non-political but highly credible institution, like the modernized monarchy, involved in humanitarian coordination. The British royal house became a trusted intermediary in situations where governmental involvement might be complicated by political considerations. The success of this expanded role validated William's entire reform project in ways that internal administrative improvements never could have achieved. The monarchy wasn't just more efficient. It was more useful to British society and the international community. The institution had evolved from a primarily symbolic role to one of active, measurable contribution to important global challenges. Marcus observed how this external validation transformed internal dynamics within the palace. Staff members who had adapted to the earlier changes now embraced them with genuine enthusiasm as they saw the meaningful impact of their improved capabilities. The transformation was no longer about organizational efficiency. It was about institutional purpose and relevance. The ripple effects extended throughout British society as citizens recognized that their monarchy was contributing tangibly to addressing serious global problems. Public approval ratings reached historic highs, not because of traditional royal pageantry, but because of demonstrable royal effectiveness in areas that mattered to contemporary life. However, the most significant long-term impact was the establishment of precedents that would guide royal involvement in future crises. William had successfully expanded the constitutional boundaries of monarchical activity without creating conflicts with democratic governance. This achievement provided a template for continuing evolution and adaptation as new challenges emerged. The financial sustainability of William's reforms was tested during this period, as expanded royal activities required increased resources and staff. Marcus watched as the prince demonstrated that modernization could be both more effective and more economical than traditional approaches. Streamlined decision-making reduced waste, while strategic partnerships leveraged royal influence to achieve greater impact with the same or fewer resources. The education and training programs implemented for royal staff during this period became models for other institutional modernization efforts. Marcus participated in several of these programs and was impressed by their focus on combining traditional skills with contemporary capabilities. Staff members learned to maintain royal protocol while using modern communication technologies, data analysis tools, and international coordination platforms. The transformation of public events and ceremonies reflected the broader institutional changes that Marcus had witnessed over the previous months. Royal occasions became more inclusive, more diverse, and more connected to contemporary social issues while maintaining their traditional dignity and historical significance. The monarchy was successfully bridging past and present in ways that honored both tradition and progress. Marcus was particularly struck by how William's personal leadership style had evolved throughout the reform process. The prince had developed remarkable skill at managing competing demands and expectations while maintaining his core vision for institutional modernization. His ability to learn from setbacks and adapt strategies without abandoning fundamental objectives demonstrated exceptional political and administrative capability. The international dimension of the monarchy's transformation continued to expand as other nations studied British innovations for potential adaptation to their own constitutional systems. William's reforms were being recognized as significant contributions to global discussions about institutional modernization and democratic governance in the 21st century. The establishment of new relationships with technology companies, international organizations, and civil society groups created ongoing opportunities for royal involvement in addressing contemporary challenges. The monarchy had positioned itself as a valuable partner for entities working on issues ranging from climate change to international development to social innovation. Marcus reflected on the complete transformation of his own role during this period. His responsibilities had expanded from traditional security functions to include coordination with international protection services, management of complex event security for innovative royal activities, and consultation on security implications of new operational protocols. The evolution of his position paralleled the broader institutional changes he had witnessed. The psychological and cultural impact of William's reforms extended far beyond the palace walls. The British public had developed new pride in their monarchy's capabilities and contributions. International perceptions of Britain were enhanced by the creative and effective royal leadership demonstrated during various crises and initiatives. The academic and scholarly attention devoted to analyzing William's reforms provided intellectual validation for the practical successes Marcus had observed. Universities were developing case studies of the transformation process, and management experts were identifying lessons applicable to other large-scale institutional change efforts. As Marcus prepared for what would be his final month of service before a well-earned retirement, he realized that he had been privileged to witness one of the most significant institutional transformations in British history. The monarchy that would continue operating after his departure was fundamentally different from the institution he had originally sworn to protect, yet it remained authentically royal in all the ways that mattered most. The day the locks changed had indeed marked the beginning of a new era, but Marcus now understood that the transformation was ongoing rather than complete. William had established foundations and precedents that would continue evolving as new challenges and opportunities emerged. The monarchy was no longer bound by rigid traditions that prevented adaptation. It was equipped with principles and capabilities that enabled continuous improvement while maintaining essential character. Looking back on the entire experience, Marcus felt profound satisfaction in having played a role, however small, in protecting and enabling this historic transformation. The monarchy he was leaving behind was stronger, more relevant, and more capable of serving British society in the modern world while maintaining its unique place in the nation's constitutional and cultural life. The locks had changed, and what they now protected was both thoroughly contemporary and timelessly royal. An institution ready for whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. William's vision had become reality, and Marcus knew that the British monarchy was prepared to thrive for generations to come, under the new paradigm that had emerged from those pivotal months of transformation. In his final security log entry, Marcus wrote simply, "Institution secure. Mission accomplished. Future ensured." The understatement reflected his professional training, but the pride in those words captured the significance of everything he had witnessed and helped protect during the remarkable period when the monarchy reinvented itself for the modern world.